Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel. My name is Colleen Carroll, and I'm a content publishing coordinator at Nexus Marketing and your moderator for today's panel session. Our topic today is Don't Take It for Granted, Best Practices for Grant Writers, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But as usual, before I introduce our panelists and we jump in, I do have a few quick logistics to cover. NXUnite is made in partnership with Nexus Marketing, and the NXUnite mission is to make introductions that lead to lasting relationships and serve as a hub for connection in the mission-driven sector. As you saw in our video, on NXUnite, you can find upcoming industry events, suggested influencers to follow, trusted solutions, cause-driven podcasts, and of course, panels with experts such as these lovely folks here with me today. Today's hour-long panel will include time both for questions curated by my team and questions from you all, our fantastic audience. So at any time during the panel session, please feel free to start submitting your questions. I tend to recommend submitting your questions via the questions tab. You can drop them in the chat. They're just a little bit more likely to get lost. But again, please start submitting those questions right now, and then we'll get to as many as we possibly can at the second half of the session. So also as we go through, if anything our panelists say make you think of a question, take a moment to submit it and we'll try to get to it at the end. If at any point you're having any technical difficulties or have any logistics questions, my team member Malou is under the Team NXUnite username, and she'll do her best to assist. So give a little holler in the chat, let us know what's happening, and we'll try to figure out how to get you back on and enjoying the session. I did also want to share that this panel session is being recorded. So if you get to the end and the insight you heard was just so fantastic, you need to hear it a second time right away. That's wonderful news. It'll automatically be in your email inbox at the end of the session. Just give it a few minutes and that recording should be there. It will also continue to be accessible on the NXUnite website in the on-demand panel section. So if you have any friends in the industry who you're like, can't believe they missed it, they needed to be there, that session was perfect for them, please feel free to share that same registration page that you used and they'll be able to access the recording. All right, finally, before I introduce today's panelists, I do want to give a big thank you to our audience, whether you are one of the 130 plus people joining us live right now, or you're watching the recording tomorrow, a month from now, a few months from now. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I hope this panel proves to be beneficial in supporting your amazing work and that you will attend future NXUnite panels and that you will also submit those questions if you are joining us live so we can make sure to address the topics relevant to you and your team. All right, jumping in with introductions, I'd first like to introduce Alice Runke, who is the president of GrantStation. Having raised over $45 million from federal, state, and private grant makers, she knows what it takes to get funded. As a former nonprofit program coordinator and director and the founder of the Grant Advantage, Alice has a deep understanding of the challenges that nonprofits face. Over the last 20 years, she's worked in the trenches with hundreds of nonprofit organizations to improve their capacity to raise funds. Glad to have you, Alice. Also here with us today is Amanda Day, a grant consultant at Dickerson Baker. She is a certified grant professional with 20 years of experience specializing in federal and state grant funding for local governments and nonprofits. A trainer, speaker, and podcast co-host with experience, stories, and information to share with nonprofits, local governments, and other organizations looking to improve their grant proposal writing management skills. Glad to have you, Amanda.
Thanks for having me.
Also with us today is Deronda Harrison, the founder and president of June 1st Firm, a grant writing firm specializing in assisting Black-led nonprofits onboard and train their current grant writing team, reducing burnout, turnover, and lack of support. Deronda knows and understands too well why quality grant professionals are leaving nonprofits in droves and wants to be a support system to properly train and onboard those new to the industry, as well as more seasoned professionals. Glad to have you, Deronda.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And finally, with us today is Siobhan Richardson, the founder of Thinkin' Inc. Grants. Siobhan has worked 18 years of experience as a grant writer, nonprofit leader, and federal grants reviewer. She worked as a corporate social responsibility program manager for the Bank of America Foundation, where she helped distribute $1.3 million in grants and sponsorships to Atlanta nonprofits each year. Now she gets grants for her clients at Thinkin' Inc. Grant Consulting and has successfully leveraged over $25 million in funding. Glad to have you, Siobhan.
Thanks, Colleen. Great to be here.
All right, we are going to jump in and get started. And Alice, I'm going to have you start us off. How have grant writing best practices changed over the last 5 years? And what do grant writers need to keep in mind today?
One of the things I think that has changed a lot is the importance to funders for organizations to be able to measure their outcomes, to really show the impact that they've had and the change that they've made in their participants and in the community. And I think that's a trend that is not going anywhere. So it's really something that if you're nervous about it or scared about it, it's something that I think that you can work at over time and get better with. And it's something that you can jump into and start a process, even if that's very new to you. But that being able to kind of answer the so what question of what you're doing, what difference do you make in people's lives, is critical. And the way that I think both funders and just donors are looking for from your organization.
Absolutely, Alice, appreciate you starting us off. Deronda, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. How have the last 5 years kind of impacted our grant writing skills and best practices?
Yeah, I definitely think partnerships are key. A lot of for nonprofits. Before, of course, that was important, but I see it being leveraged even more so today. Funders really want to see you making a difference with other organizations, and I always tell clients, you have a better chance of winning this proposal by partnering with other organizations and making sure that we're highlighting that work that we're doing. So we may serve students or young adults ages 18 to 24, providing them job training. What other resources do these students need? What other supports do they need that our organizations do not provide? So, or your organization doesn't provide? What other nonprofits or community-based organizations can you partner with? Funders really I love that. They really want to see that in your grant application. I think it's so important to make sure you highlight that as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Siobhan, over to you. Thoughts about how the last 5 years have impacted the grant world?
Yeah, I would echo Alice and Deronda's sentiments. Definitely, outcomes are really important. Be very thoughtful about your programming before you start writing grants, right? And Deronda's point about engaging in partnerships, right? And effective partnerships that really bring value to the proposal. I would probably also add being very thoughtful about how an organization distinguishes themselves as an organization and how they distinguish their programming, because there are a lot of nonprofits focusing on various different areas, but I really think the difference between funding one organization versus another is how are you unique? How is what you're doing different than what other folks are doing? And why should we support you out of the hundreds of applications we receive? I find that organizations that can speak to that very eloquently and really define their unique proposition are in a better chance to submit competitive proposals.
Fantastic. Amanda, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. How have the last 5 years impacted us?
I'd say two changes that kind of came to mind when I first saw this question was one, just the level of professionalism in the grant profession, I feel like is being elevated. I remember when I first started trying to even find training related to grants, trying to find other people who did it. We were so disconnected, and there was just, I'm not saying groups weren't around, but now there's just so many organizations focused on grants. There's the grant professional certified credential you can get that has the 9 competencies. Those are some great, if you're looking for best management practices on the skills that you should know, even if you don't feel like taking the GPC exam, certainly not required, but the competencies listed for that exam really highlight the level and the skills that we need to have to be good at our jobs. And the second thing I've noticed more recently, it's been happening, but now just the technology related to grants. Used to we would write up an application and you'd have to send in your one application and your 12 copies, and they'd have to be stapled in the left-hand corner and all that fun stuff. There's still a few of those around, but most agencies now, whether it's a foundation or a federal agency, have those online places, whether it's a Google form you're filling out, whether it's a SharePoint site and you're uploading attachments, or whether it's just grants through the Department of Justice. And as a grant professional, you're like, okay, it's taking me longer to get into this system and figure it out than it is to actually write the grant. And so we're having to, every new grant platform, I feel like I'm trying to figure out something new that has nothing to do with grant writing. So that's a thing that we're having to figure out as we go.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Amanda. All right, Siobhan, I'm going to have you start us off with our next question. For those who may be fairly new to the world of grant writing, what do they need to hear, and do you have any recommended resources?
Great question. I would start by saying, I'm sure my fellow panelists would agree, that grant writers come from all backgrounds, all walks of life, all types of experiences. And if you ask a grant writer, well, how did you get here? The story may be like, well, I was over budgets, or I was managing this or in an administrative position, and someone said, hey, you can write. Come over here and write this grant. And a lot of people, that's kind of how their story started, right? So I would say, I would encourage anyone, regardless of your background or your experience, that if you're gravitating to the grant profession, definitely, connect, right? Join professional organizations like the Grant Professionals Association so you can connect with other folks. I would say GPA has been very instrumental in my career growth because I was able to connect with others and find my tribe, and also really access a lot of the training. So the second point I would make is invest in yourself in knowing the craft. Attend webinars, read books, be a scholar in our profession. There are a lot of different books and resources that are out there. I would say that invest in yourself, because once you have the knowledge and credentials like the GPC, no one can take that away from you, right? So I would say, if I was starting out, read every book you can get your hands on, attend every webinar, go to conferences. In the very beginning, it may not make sense, but in time, it will.
Great. Thank you so much, Siobhan. Amanda, over to you. Thoughts for those new to the grant writing world? Any recommended resources?
Well, I was second what Siobhan said, that we're right. We all started, grants was not something we set out to do as a 12-year-old, right? It's something that we fell into for one reason or another. And there are so many resources now to take advantage of, and it can be overwhelming. So my advice, pick one or two things and start there. You can always add to it, but I mean, there's just so much out there that it's hard to know where to start. Some of my favorite places to go, there's a website called nonprofit.courses. The gentleman who created that, he just pulls resources from a lot of other places. And what I really love, one of the drop-down menus is you can pick content by how much time. So if you're like, hey, I've got 15 minutes before my day is over, he's got some content that's from 5 to 7 minutes. So you could pick one or two quick things to learn really quick. So I definitely recommend that website. There are a lot of companies like Nexus here who, even though training may not be, they're not selling their training, they're doing a lot of stuff in the grant space though. And part of it is they're building this community and doing free webinars like this. So obviously check out the other NXUnite webinars. The company Found It has a great grant community. Instrumental has a great community. And so those are some great places. I definitely echo the Grant Professionals Association. It is where I found my people. And I've got to do a shameless plug. I do have a podcast called Fundraising Heyday. And so lots of free content there. So thanks for the claps there. So there's tons of podcasts, more and more coming out in the grant and fundraising world too. So give them a check. I'll throw in the chat box some of the places I was saying. So you've got them there.
Perfect. Yeah, I can see there was a question of what website you mentioned, which I believe was nonprofit.courses was the website in question there. Awesome. Alice, over to you. Thoughts on what people new to the grant writing world need to know, and any recommended resources?
So one of the things that I really do believe is that grant writing is a skill that you develop over time, and where you start versus where you end can be very different places. So I do just recommend that you kind of get started with some of the things that Siobhan and Amanda have already talked about, of getting kind of in the game, and you'll learn and you'll grow and you'll make mistakes, but just try. It's really, a process that I think we get better at and that we can really improve with. And kind of following Amanda a little bit, but I'm going to give a shameless plug for Grant Station, where we provide a lot of resources, tutorials, webinars, benchmarkers, all sorts of tools to help you as a grant writer to learn those skills and help further your organization. So I have to give that plug as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alice. All right, over to you, Deronda. Thoughts on what we need to hear for new to the grant writing world, as well as any recommended resources?
Yes, these ladies hit the nail on the head. I really have nothing else to add, but just to share my journey, I started in grants 2013. I attended GPA, their national conference that they have every year in November. I had not touched a grant application. I didn't barely know what a grant was, but I dived in. I went to that conference. I invested in myself, and I did it. I met people, and the rest is history. So that's why I just want to encourage others, just really get into those resources, check out those conferences, meet other grant professionals. None of these ladies here are my competition. I consider them all to be my friends, my colleagues. And I noticed with GPA, we're really plugging GPA here, is that it's not competitive at all. And that's why I'm still a member. Everyone is very helpful, very friendly. I can call Siobhan, who's extremely busy, and we can hop on a Zoom call. She makes time for me. The same thing with Amanda. And, I'm so excited to be a part of this community. So I tell anyone that wants to dive into grant writing, definitely look at your other grant professionals as, colleagues, friends, and resources as well.
Colleen, may I insert a shameless plug for GPA? During the month of March, we are having a membership drive. If you join now, you get 3 months free on your membership. So visit the GPA website, or if you follow me on LinkedIn, there's a post there where you can click the link to sign up. Thank you.
Incredible. Glad you added that, Siobhan. And Deronda, just to go back to what you said, I feel like I get a sneak peek of the grant writing world with these grant panels. It's some of the nicest audience members and panelists are involved with the grant panels. So I definitely feel like I have seen that world that you are talking about. All right, I do want to shout out to our audience that again, we have had a few polls go live. If you want to let us know a little bit more about you and your organization and your goals, we had a question of how different are your grant writing tactics today in comparison to 5 years ago, based on that first question we went through with our panelists. And now, how long have you been writing grants? So if you want us to know a little bit more about who you are and who is on the session today, that's a great place to do so. Also, again, please feel free to start submitting questions. I know I've seen a few already come in, but keep sending them in. And again, the more that we have kind of in advance, I feel like the more that we're going to be able to get through in that second half of the session. So keep submitting those questions. All right, Amanda, I'm going to have you start us off with our next question. Unfortunately, we aren't going to win every grant that we apply for. Any advice for taking advantage of the no? What should nonprofits do when faced with rejection?
Yeah, first of all, just understand that I always say anybody who says they have 100% success rate, they probably wrote one, got it, and quit. Because if you've been doing this long enough, you're going to get denied. I get denial letters because it is uber competitive. It doesn't, no matter how targeted you are, which is smart to be, and no matter how much you're doing that mission match and priority match, and you're checking every box, there's usually more of a request than there is money. And so good projects get turned all the time. So first of all, don't feel like, oh my gosh, this is not the profession for me. So it happens. I always say, keep that application, because it is so much easier the next time you go to apply to have a draft that now you're zhuzhing it up. You're making it a little better. You're figuring out what you can improve versus staring at that blank application. So doing a rewrite is so much easier, and it's going to be better because you have taken more time to come back and go and look. If you're able, federal funders tend to do this more than on the private side of things, but if you are able to get feedback from your funder, when you get that no letter, if you've got a contact, I don't think twice about emailing or calling and saying, hey, is there any way I can get some feedback, whether you can get your score, if you can get reviewer comments. Sometimes the funder, I've had funders that will sit down and set up a meeting, and for an hour, they'll talk with me over each section, going over like, hey, this, we gave you a 10 out of 10. I wouldn't change anything, but here's where you were weak. Here's, you need more support letters, or your budget needs to be, more detailed, or, you just didn't have enough research, or whatever it is. So then for the next time around. So, anything you can do to improve it, and try again. There are plenty of funders I've come to, and it took the second or third time before we finally got our foot in the door.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amanda. Alice, I'd love your thoughts on this as well. How do you recommend handling a no or a rejection?
I really just need to echo Amanda. She kind of took all my answers to that. But no, that's all right. I love these panels too, because it's like everyone really is always singing from the same hymnal, so to speak. And yet we're all coming from different places. So I always love to see that. But that persistence is key. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time. but you invested in that first one, like Amanda was talking about. Get those comments and work on it to make it better for the next submission.
Fantastic. Deronda, anything you want to add in terms of handling the no and the rejection?
Yes, exactly what Amanda said. Federal, they do provide you the feedback, the reviewer comments, your scoring. A lot of times it's much more easier to get that information, but your more private foundation grants typically do not. However, when you are unable to get someone on the phone or have those conversations, you now kind of have an open doorway to say, hey, we've applied for this grant. We took the time to actually put in an application. We were rejected and we were like, just for information. So now you have some type of leverage. We actually took the time to apply instead of just calling them out of the blue. Hey, should we apply or whatever that looks like. So just making sure to really leverage the opportunity that you did apply and you were not selected. And you just want to learn why. You want to know how to you can improve your application because you feel that we all would be a really great partner because of course you did conduct your research.
Wonderful. All right, Siobhan, I think you know what question I'm going to ask. Any advice for handling a no?
Yeah, I could probably wear my previous grant maker hat for a moment to just shed some insight into how that process works sometimes. Sometimes, when you're on the other side reviewing grant applications, sometimes it can really be this is the first time they've applied. And not rejecting you solely based on that, but rejecting you based on, I don't know enough about them. And I would like the opportunity to learn more about them, but they will never say that to you because the message is, I'm sorry, you were not one of the many worthy projects, or we were not able to fund so many dollars, not enough dollars, so many good projects, yada, yada, yada. So sometimes they're not going to be able to say that to you, right? But to Alice's point, I want to really highlight the persistence, not to be discouraged, because sometimes in a reviewer's mind or a reviewer panel's mind, we want to learn more. We want them to apply again, but this year's not their time, right? So you never know what they're thinking because that will never be communicated to you. So if you really feel like there's a strong alignment, apply again and use some of the tips that were shared today as far as getting feedback on your proposal or maybe having someone look at it and strengthen it for next year, because you never know. You might have been right at that cutoff, or you might have been this close, and you will never know if you just don't reapply. So I just wanted to highlight that point.
Great. Thank you so much, Siobhan. Deronda, I'm going to have you start us off with our next question. For our grant writers that are ready to really take their grant writing to the next level, what advice or insights do you have, and are there any best practices to keep in mind?
Yeah, I think it's really helpful. What was really helpful for me that took my writing to the next level was being immersed in the organization that I was writing for, being able to sit in program, being able to interact with the actual individuals delivering the program, being able to interact with the clients, the recipients of the program, and how they're benefiting. You hear stories, you hear testimonials, you see them on the website, you see them on the annual reports, but actually seeing them live and in person, it's when you as the writer can make your proposal come to life. And I really think it's important to do that. If you're just getting started out, of course, working directly at a nonprofit, you can get that like hands-on one-on-one experience. And if you decide to go into, of course, consulting, of course, but I really think that's a really great way to really take your writing to the next level. And one thing I always tell people, a simple tip is answer the question that's being asked. I know a lot of times I've heard a lot of feedback, and I've been a reviewer. These are real people, human people reviewing your application. And I see the ones that don't do well, they just simply don't answer the question. So really answer the question. That funder is asking you that for a reason. So making sure that you answer the question. And if you need professional services or assistance, really look into that, because grant writing is a skill. There are some people that are just really great writers, but they may not be a grant writer. So just some things to think about.
Great. Thank you so much. Siobhan, over to you. Any thoughts for those ready to kind of take their grant writing to the next level?
I echo everything Deronda said.
All right, that works. All right, Amanda, anything you want to add for those taking it to the next level?
I would say, and we've kind of mentioned this before, but find your people. grant writing is such a broad term, but there's like, we've got different people that are really good at certain types of grant writing. And when I started my career, I worked for a city. So I did a lot of federal and state grants for public safety and roads and storm. I've written grants to build a detention pond. So I've learned about stormwater, but figuring out both who within my organization are my subject matter experts that I can learn from, so I can take all the knowledge they have to be able to put it in a grant proposal, but also meeting other grant writers who do the exact work that I do. I feel like my work was so much more elevated once I found other people that did the work I do, because then you've got them you can call and email and be like, hey, I'm struggling with this. And chances are they've dealt with that before. Or you can call them up and say, hey, I need someone to edit my work. Can we trade out? I'll do something for you. You do something for me. Because if you're the lone grant writer, which a lot of us are, the only people in our organization that do that job, people can edit your work, but there's nothing like having that experienced grant professional editing your work versus just someone who's like, well, yeah, I know where commas go. So finding your people who can help build you up, I think, really help. That's what did it for my career.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amanda. All right, Alice, anything to add on those looking to really improve their grant writing skills?
I would just add that I think if you have opportunities to become a grant reviewer, your local United Ways, your local community foundations, those kinds of organizations are always looking for community volunteers. So it's a really great opportunity to sit on the other side of the table and see what those questions are, what those sticky points are, all those sorts of things on the decision maker side. And those United Ways and community foundations are always looking for community-minded or individuals to participate. So I think that's a great way to kind of up your skills.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alice. Very quickly, I want to turn back to those polls. We asked how different are your grant writing tactics today in comparison to 5 years ago. 50% of you said that you weren't writing grant proposals 5 years ago, so it's pretty different, which is awesome. 32% said fairly different, 11% said pretty much the same, and 9% said vastly different. And then we also asked, how long have you been grant writing? 33% of you have been doing it for 8+ years, 25% in the 1 to 3 year range, 21% in less than a year, and 21% in 4 to 8 years. So we are all across the board in terms of how long we've been writing grants. So just wanted to share that with the group. All right, I have one final question from my team for our panelists, and then I'm officially opening the door to our audience questions. So keep sending them in. I've seen the little notifications that questions are coming in, but keep sending them. And again, we'll get through as many as we possibly can. But before we do that, Deronda, I'm going to have you start us off with our next question. Best practices are always changing, and it can be a little overwhelming when things are always on the move. Any advice for ways to stay up to date without getting overwhelmed?
Yeah, when I started, it was the big thing was sustainability, the sustainability question, like how are you answering this question? Then it shifted over into DEI and how is your organization highlighting those things? So you'll notice like things just shift, like there's a focus. All those things are still important, but things are like really be the focus of organizations. There was another really big one as well, like how are you really leveraging or really thinking about systems change work? Like your work is really making a difference within nonprofits. So like over the years, these focus changes have been happening and occurring and just really, really big. Buzzwords is what I call them. So if you're doing this work, you're going to see those type of like shifts in the applications and the questions and things that they're asking. Like for me, it was like sustainability. What does that mean? Are they talking about the environment? Like I didn't even know what that meant. So again, going to trainings and conferences and learning how to like answer these questions, how to address this. Basically, all they were asking were, how does your nonprofit run without grants? Basically, how are you going to continue to do this work without us supporting you? So being able to really answer those questions is important. A lot of organizations depend so much on grants, and if those grants were to go away, they essentially would be in trouble. So really putting together a very strong fundraising plan. Again, if you need to work with a professional to do that, I'm not advertising that because I don't do that, but just really something to think about is really looking to put together a fundraising plan for your organization, grants that can be a line item, but really think about other ways of bringing revenue for your organization, individual donations, leveraging in-kind donations, any program support or work that revenue that you can bring in. So just making sure that you're really thinking about your organization overall, the revenue, and grants is kind of like extra money, if you will.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Deronda. Alice, over to you. Any thoughts on staying up to date and not getting overwhelmed as best practices shift and change?
Yeah, I really want to tag on to what Deronda said, because that kind of using grants as one spoke in your wheel as opposed to the whole wheel is really important, and figuring out ways to do that for your organization and not just put all your eggs in the grant basket, so to speak. And funders like to see that you have support coming from other places. And so that's really a critical piece in just your overall organization sustainability. And these guys have all mentioned like the Grant Professionals Association, and then you have, this panel, and there's a lot of different opportunities just to get out there and connect. And so I really recommend, I kind of troll the Grant Professionals Association, their message board every day, just to see what's new, just to see if there's, things that maybe GrantStation could add to help grant writers, those kinds of things. So, just staying connected within the community, I think you'll find it very, very supportive instead of competitive.
Fantastic. Siobhan, over to you. Any suggestions for avoiding getting overwhelmed when best practices change?
Yeah, I love the not to get overwhelmed part of that question, right? Because it could easily happen, right? I will say, um, speaking from the perspective of a person that has no time, right? And a lot of my colleagues here and a lot of grant writers are in that same predicament where you just don't have time, right? Sometimes you're just doing grants day to day, and sometimes it's hard, right? I would encourage folks to take out that time for professional development, right? Make that a priority and carve out time to do it. The second thing I would say is, even though as grant professionals we're all very busy, there all are kind of lulls and slow periods throughout the year, right? We have very busy periods, and sometimes between grants there's some slower periods. So I personally try to take advantage of that slower time to kind of go to my list of professional development resources, especially recordings, right? Because sometimes you just, scheduling conflicts, you can't make it. And that's why I'm so grateful that this is being recorded, because it's another great resource for folks to tap into. So I would encourage folks, when you have those lulls in your schedule or through the year, to take advantage of those opportunities to bookmark different resources and invest that time to do it. I think that's the best way to keep up on best practices without getting overwhelmed, because there is a lot and you can filter some of the resources at your leisure, but just keep that running list, and then you can kind of, bite that list in small chunks so you don't get overwhelmed.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Siobhan. All right, Amanda, over to you. Any thoughts on not getting overwhelmed when changing best practices?
I think just two quick points is one, that no matter where you are in your career, you want to always be learning something, and so professional development needs to be a part of your yearly experience. Because I've been doing this for 22 years now, and I still carve out time for certain conferences, certain webinars. So number one, I think you just need to always be learning something new. And the second time I'm with Siobhan, it can be very overwhelming, but because there is so much, there's so many options. There's a few people posting some resources in the chat, which is fabulous, but figure out how much time you have and then find those resources, whether you're engaged in a year-long program that's happening so often a month, or whether you are just grabbing, a webinar a month. And like Siobhan says, going back and, the recorded ones are great, because it's like, can't make it live, but, Saturday evening, I've got nothing going on, so here we go. Right. So but setting aside, carving out that time to make sure you keep up, because like Deronda says, there's always a new buzz thing that's going to be important. And usually it's not just a sentence or two in an application. Usually it's something that has to be part of your whole organization. You can't write a good sustainability answer in a grant application if you don't actually have a sustainability plan for your organization. So gotta keep up with all that fun stuff.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Amanda. All right, we are officially switching over to our audience questions, so get excited for that, everyone. Keep sending them in if you have more questions, though, and we'll get through as many as we possibly can. Siobhan, I'm going to have you start us off with our first one. We had a question that said, we see grants say that they don't accept unsolicited applications. Do you recommend still applying, or is it not worth the time?
I always say people give to people, and relationship building is really important. And so oftentimes when foundations say they don't accept unsolicited proposals, often they have an LOI process, right? Um, so the LOI to me is an opportunity to start building a relationship. And then that unsolicited hopefully will turn to a solicited opportunity. All the folks that are clients of Thinking Eat Grants that have been consistently winning grants with us, it's because we really, really believe in building relationships. It's really key. And I understand all of them, it's not easy to do. Like I saw a question in there about smaller foundations. How do you build relationships with smaller foundations when sometimes they're not in the office, there's no website, there's no contact information, right? I understand those struggles, but for opportunities where where you can build a relationship, try. And I think a big part of that is really being very thoughtful about who's on your prospect list. I think sometimes nonprofit leaders want like 100 grants. Sometimes those 10 well-aligned funders are the folks that you should thoroughly invest in spending time with, building a relationship with, versus trying to spread yourself so thin, going after so many grant opportunities.
Great, thank you so much. We've had a ton of questions come in, so I'm not going to have every panelist answer every question, but I want to open the floor. Anyone have anything they want to add to this question of how to
Yes,
handle
only thing,
unsolicited?
yeah, I just wanted to say about the unsolicited, exactly what Siobhan said. I guarantee you there are a handful of other grants that you could apply for that that do not have the we do not accept unsolicited requirements. So definitely focus your time and attention on that. And then, of course, as you build your grant program, from there, you want to go after new opportunities, you can cultivate to go into the new opportunities.
Fantastic. Anyone else have anything they want to add to that?
I just have a quick thing to add to that. With GrantStation and our databases of funders, we only include those funders who are accepting applications, just for that time saving. You know, once you do your search, you know that this list of funders is going to be accepting applications. So that's kind of part of our process, is to do that screening for you. And so you can focus then your time on those that are more likely. Looking at longer term opportunities, I always look at, unsolicited as, think of that as a long-term strategy to develop those relationships that Siobhan was talking about. So if you want to do it and you want to invest that time there, think of it as a longer-term strategy for your organization, but then focus your time on those that would likely fund you.
Great, thank you so much, Alice. Amanda, I have a question for you from the chat. Someone asked, how do you grow from a note when the funder says there were no notes on your application and that they just didn't have enough funding to fund all the projects?
Unfortunately, especially with a lot of foundations that really don't have staff, you're not going to get any feedback from them. And that is honestly the hardest thing. I've got a small local client I work with, and there are some local foundations that we go for and have gone for a couple of times and just get that standard form feedback, nothing else. Honestly, if going back to what Siobhan said, if we can find those connections with the relationships, I think I put this in the chat, spending some time and figuring out who is on their board. Does someone on your board or within your staff know them? Then that's worth picking up the phone and saying, hey, I don't know if you realize I work for such and such nonprofit. We're trying to get our foot in the door with you. One of the things I've tried successfully, especially smaller foundations, is if I keep getting those no's, I will come back in at a smaller dollar amount. Like say I've been asking them for $25,000. I may submit a $1,000 or $5,000 request. And sometimes that will get us in the door. then my next request can be a bigger one, because then they've worked with us for a year and they know us and they're like, oh, okay. So that's another option, is to try to come back at a smaller jumping off point. But honestly, sometimes you keep hearing no, and there is nothing, because they just don't have staff. They don't have an email. They don't have a website, and there's really nothing you can do, which is the most frustrating thing in the world for a grant writer.
All right. Anyone have anything to add before we jump to the next question? All right. In that question, Deronda, a question for you. Someone asked how to recognize as a small and fairly new nonprofit when it would be beneficial to get a professional grant writer in, or like get professional assistance.
Yeah, I definitely say when you can afford it and it makes sense for your organization, really consider the return on your investment. That's what I like to tell organizations. So yes, this may be $3,000, $4,000 per month coming out of your organization, but in 90 days, would your organization have brought in 25 or 30 or even 50,000 or more by hiring a professional, let me stress, professional grant writer that knows what they're doing? Unfortunately, I've worked with clients who have paid grant writers, and they didn't get any results. So making sure that you hire a professional. I always send people to the Grant Professionals Association list. Looking at your follow these people, like check them out, see what they're doing, see what they're talking about. I would say really study individuals before you start giving them your money. And also, it's a really great time to really start going after grants. Once you start winning like grants with your community foundations, you really want to build your grant program, leveraging those wins, your local United Ways. A lot of your local utility companies, they do those roundup programs. So when I'm working with your smaller emerging nonprofits, we'll start with those. We start with your local community foundations. United Ways love to give the small nonprofits, and your local like utility companies. So really look into those as quick wins and opportunities for your nonprofit.
Great. Thank you so much. Another call. Anyone have anything they need to add? All right. In that case, Alice, question for you. Someone in the chat asked, how or who do you approach at United Way, community organizations, et cetera, to offer services as a reviewer?
Oh, so usually they have like a community services representative or some name like that, and that's the person that is kind of over their grant process. So I would just reach out to anybody that has kind of community, or even sometimes it might just be grant coordinator, but they will have someone on their staff that you can connect in with that usually oversees their process. And usually if you call anyone, you can just ask who that person is and they'd be able to direct you. And they're, the United Ways that I've volunteered with, they do a great training with you and really help you, learn what they want and things like that. So they have a great system to help, you as a reviewer understand the process. So great question.
Well, and if I may, I will say your mileage is probably going to vary too. Like I've worked with some United Ways that are fantastic and very hands-on and very, very helpful. I've also worked with United Ways that it's almost like they've got the door shut and locked. And if you're not already in, it can be really hard to get in. So if you feel like you're just hitting your head against a brick wall, no, you're not alone there. And that's for every funder there. Your mileage always varies with how helpful and how willing they are to work with you, especially with foundations. It's their money and they get to decide how it goes out the door. So if you're feeling frustrated, I just want to share that, like, don't feel like everybody else has figured it out. Not always.
Thank you so much for that addition, Amanda. Siobhan, a question for you. Someone in the chat asked, what is your advice on how to continue relationships with funders after you have won the grant?
Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful for this question. I just wrote an article on this like 2 days ago. So this is so crazy. So the word of the day is stewardship. um, it's just so uncanny because to me it is like the most underrated skill set that folks like overlook, the stewardship part. Um, and this is a lot of the things I talk about in this article. To me, stewardship is very different than cultivating a relationship with a funder. That's something you do up front. To us at our firm, stewardship is what you do on the back end. And some people will say, well, I'm submitting my quarterly report. aren't I like engaging with them enough? And I would say no, right? That's a start, but that's not enough. Stewardship to me is having regular meetings with your funder to say, in addition and above the reports that you're sending in, to saying, hey, this is what's going on. Our program, even if it's just 15 minutes, just keep you in a loop of how we're progressing, sharing any challenges or any successes that you want to communicate, sending funder your annual report, like, hey, this is what we did. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I would say in my past roles as a grant maker, I think one of the most interesting stewardship strategies that I have seen is that someone sent me a handmade card from one of the children in the program, like crayons, the whole thing, the glue stick with the construction paper in the mail. So I came into my office and that was on my desk. And people don't mail things anymore. So I said, wow, this is really special. So I opened it and that's what it was. And I kept that on my office. Like I taped it and I never forgot. And I always remembered that organization because they did little things to kind of keep me engaged and aware of their programming. So anything cool like that you can think of is always good. I will say folks at foundations their emails are swamped, right? Adding them to your newsletter list is not a good idea. But any personal outreach that you can send to a person personally, maybe follow up with a phone call or do all the things that you can do just to kind of maintain a relationship with them.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. People in the chat are hoping you will provide a link to the article or where they will be able to find an article if it's not live yet. Awesome. Thank you. Amanda, a question for you. Can you recommend resources for organizations seeking to strengthen their program evaluation? Do you have any advice for grant professionals who need to persuade program leadership of the importance of this?
Oh, I'm trying to think of resources. I mean, I may have to think about that and throw in the chat, and some of these other ladies may have some off the top of their head. But I will say a big part of leadership as a grant professional, oftentimes we're not, department level, we're not VPs. Sometimes you are, but usually not. And so I feel like a lot of my time I'm educating up in constant communication with my boss, my board about what grants can and can't do, the rules and regulations we have to follow, and also just explaining like mission match, and we can't go forever funding, and also that grant is not a solo sport. Yes, you hired me as the grant writer, but you can't shove me in a cubicle in the corner and have me sit and write 12 hours a day because I can't do it all alone. I need help from budget. I need help from program officers. I need help from the community. I need, and so that's just got to kind of be embedded as part of your job, whether you're meeting with your boss regularly. I've also often found, rather than me saying things, if I could come back and say, I just attended this webinar and there was a panel of 4 individuals who each had 20 plus years of experience and they all said this, or I was at this conference, then they paid attention to me more. What's crazy is an organization I worked at for 12 years. There were things I would tell them and they just like they didn't believe me. I quit. I became a consultant. A few years later, I came back to work for them as a consultant. And suddenly everything I said was gospel. And I'm like, I haven't changed. I'm the same person. I'm saying the exact same thing. But they believe me now because I'm a consultant. I'm more official. And I'm like, I'm not any different. So I feel your pain there. But as far as evaluation resources, I'm going to have to think about that.
Yeah, can I jump in? Grant readiness programs. I don't do these, but I do have colleagues that do. So I'm sure you all will have my information at the end of this. But if you go through a grant readiness program or coaching, that is a part of that process. They sit with your program to develop the goals, objectives, outcomes for the program. And at the end of that, you'll have all that information. You literally just plug and play that information into your grant application. So if you want to get grant ready, I definitely say invest in grant readiness. A grant readiness program, grant readiness coaching. The individual I send a lot of my colleagues to, or potential or organizations that are interested in that, she provides coaching, like where she'll actually be on the call with you one-on-one and develop your mission, your vision, your program outcomes, basically everything that's asked in a grant. You're developing all those things. You're ready. You're going to be ready to go as soon as that coaching program is over, and you can just jump right into applying for grants. So that's something else to consider. And your evaluation plan, your sustainability plan, your fundraising is all developed at the end of that.
Great. Anyone? Oh, yes, Alice.
And I would also like to add that a lot of times you can use like your local universities or colleges to help with developing that outcome measurement plan or an evaluation plan. And they can be really helpful and provide that guidance for you, usually at no cost, unless they're the actual evaluator. And then the other thing is just, I know people get scared of the term logic models, but if you just go out there and just Google logic models for domestic violence programs, for youth camps, whatever it is that you do, you're going to see a lot of samples out there that then you don't have to reinvent the wheel and start at ground zero. You can take what some other people have done and then weave that into your programs in a way that makes sense to your programs. So those would be two resources I would look at.
Mhm. I'd like to jump in.
Siobhan is the best at logic models. I hate them. She did a class at GPA Seattle, I believe it was. I was like, oh my God, this was actually fun.
It was.
So
It was.
you need to package that. You need to package that up and sell it.
You know, I think I will. So to Deronda's point, I did for the last two GPA conferences, Logic Model Live, and it made Logic Models fun, and it walked all the participants through how to do a logic model. I am a logic model nerd. I really believe in logic models. I named my company Think and Ink Grants to help folks think strategically about grant writing before inking. Because so we do consulting as well. And so for us, the logic model is such an integral part in, and I do it for all my clients actually. I feel as a reviewer, I can tell when a proposal, if they did a logic model or not. I can read it and it comes across very clear. I will also speak to the relationship between logic models and evaluation plans. They're cousins. One leads to the next, right? So you need a comprehensive logic model for you to develop an evaluation plan. And at my firm, we're very fortunate to have two evaluators on staff, right? So we're heavy in the evaluation space. I did drop a link. Hopefully everyone was able to look at it to I might get the acronym wrong. I might screw this up, but that's okay. I'll come up in a Google search. The American Association of Evaluators, I want to say. Their website has some resources there as well. I think part of the question was about like communicating the importance of evaluations to the higher ups. And to me, at the end of the day, it's about, do you want to win the grant or not? Very clearly. If you want to win the grant, you have to prioritize things like logic models and evaluation plans. I would say whenever I have gotten feedback from a reviewer on a proposal, they have always said your evaluation plan section was phenomenal, right? I find that that's where most folks drop the ball. That's where they lose points. When you start talking about outcomes and measurement and evaluation plan, they can talk about their programming all day long and who they serve, and it's so beautiful. But the nitty gritty of the proposal, sometimes folks lose points there. So we always want to make sure that those two sections are flawless, right? Because we know folks aren't as strong in those two areas.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, I have to start wrapping us up as we are almost at the hour, but I do have one final question for each of our panelists, so we hear from you one last time. I'm going to admit that it's a pretty big and broad question to smush into this final slot, but I do think it's a fun kind of thought exercise, so I hope you'll enjoy it with me. And Deronda, I'll have you start us off. What do you see as the future of grant writing, and how can we get ahead today?
AI. I'm so excited about ChatGPT. It saves me so much time. I know this whole thing about it being ethical or unethical. It's just like with anything. It's just like when you go on Google and find some information you need, maybe you can drop into the grant. If you don't, what's it called? Plagiarize it. You don't copy it. You judge it up, you change it around. And it's been such a game changer for me. It saved me time. I'm a solo grant writer. I have like some grant writing assistants. All my people that assist me are 1099. But just being able to conduct research, I'm the type of person that actually enjoys doing research, but anything that can save me time as we're so busy. I think artificial intelligence, the future of that and where it's headed, I definitely say leverage it as much as you can. And of course, make it benefit you. And of course, there are some people that have already figured out a lot of things and some tips around it already. So just continue to immerse yourself in it and don't be afraid of it.
Thank you so much, Deronda. Amanda, what are your thoughts on the future and how can we get ahead today?
I'd say I'd go back to what I said earlier. It's just there is so much. There's AI, there's tech, there's project management tools. There's so much tech out there to help you do your job better that I found myself getting overwhelmed with. Number one, I can't afford it all. And number two, if I spend so much time doing all of that, I'm not doing the actual work. And so don't feel like you always have to keep up with the latest and greatest. If you're good at what you do, figure out the handful of tools that make your life easier and roll with it. And don't feel like you have to change every year because something new has rolled out.
Thank you, Amanda. Alice, thoughts on the future and how we can get ahead today?
I think piggybacking off a little bit of Amanda on that with the technology, you know, that the good old days, if they were good old days, of taking your grants to the post office. Now, personally, I like when I can package my proposals and that they look the way that I want them to look. And sometimes when the applications are online, we can't put, you know, tables in there or we can't put visuals and that can like frustrate me because I sometimes think that that can really help you tell your story. But that technology is important, and that's the way we're going. So, like it or not, that's kind of the way you're going to be submitting your grants and doing certain things. So, learning that and understanding that process is important.
All right, Siobhan, any final thoughts on the future and how we can get ahead today?
Yeah, I have two thoughts on that. One from the nonprofit perspective, and the other from a grant professional perspective. My first thought from a nonprofit perspective is trust-based philanthropy. Like, I'm excited to see what that can grow and what it can look like in the future. I know some foundations are starting to adopt that approach, and some are getting there, right? So I'm excited to see what that may look like. As far as our industry, I'm looking forward to seeing our industry grow, and that word grant professional being an actual profession that is defined out there in the world. Because some people will ask, like, wow, I didn't know that was a thing. Like, I'll tell people what I do, and they're like, I didn't know that was a thing. You know, right? I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of us out here doing this, right? And so, for just greater awareness about our profession and being kind of like putting the stamp of approval, like, yes, this is a bona fide profession, and we are here and ready to change the world.
Absolutely. All right, with that, we have reached the end of our panel. I know if we were in an in-person setting, there would be a round of applause. So just know that I'm sending that to you emotionally through the screen today. I do also want to give a big thank you to our audience. Thank you so much for joining us live. If you could, really enjoyed the very active chat discussion. Sorry we didn't get through all the questions, but you'll just have to attend future NXUnite panels. I promise we'll have future panels on grant writing. Um, with that in mind, I do want to say keep an eye out on the NXUnite website, NXUnite LinkedIn, and even if you find me on LinkedIn for our future sessions, we have a ton of topics in the nonprofit world, including on gratitude and um, donor engagement and all sorts of other amazing nonprofit topics, as well as grant writing panels. So keep your eye out for that. And very, very quick plug, as I know we've hit time, is I just want to say that if you too intend to attend future NXUnite panels, I highly recommend making a free NXUnite account. This way you're going to get an added bonus for joining. When you have a free NXUnite account, when you join sessions, you get what are called cause coins. And when you amass enough of those, you get some discounts on some industry software and some free consultations with some of our friends in the industry. So if you're going to be spending time with us anyway, I just want you to get that extra benefit. All right, that is it for me. I know we are at time. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to our audience, and I hope you all have a nice rest of your day. Bye, everyone.